Hey there, Dangar here. Today's video is about outboards that won't go into gear or won't stay in gear. It's a pretty common problem and it can have a few different causes. The boat we're looking at today, I've actually already looked at it before, so I'm pretty sure I know what's wrong with it. But I'll sort of go through a bit of the process of things you should check if this is happening to your boat. So there's two main types of gear selection in outboards. There's a sort of a push-pull mechanism like this one, where this lever comes up and down to select gears, comes down here to the front of the drive shaft here, and there's a sort of a twisting style. So you know, the principles are pretty much the same with all of them, but in this case, both this and the boat we're looking at is a push-pull style. So in this case, you can see this one's actually currently in forward gear. So when the motor turns clockwise, which Yamahas do, the prop's in forward gear, and then if we push down on this, I don't have to damage that thread, then it's in neutral, and then down further again. It may take a bit of a turn to get it in. Then when we turn clockwise on the drive shaft, the prop's in reverse. So there's essentially just three positions it goes. So your first problem may be that your cable isn't pushing this into the right position. So we'll have a look at what adjustment you got there on the cables. So these are the two control cables that come from the forward controls to the outboard. This one's the throttle and this one's the gear selector. These Yamaha fittings just slide back, which lets you then pull this selector off. It's actually missing on this one, and then obviously just forward again, get in the way, forward again to lock that. This one's actually missing in it, it's just got a circlip, like an aftermarket sort of circlip put on, so I'll just pull that off. So that's what that looks like. It'll hold it just as well. It's just a little bit harder to move on and off. But once that's off, we can now move this gear selector. So that's neutral, that's forward, neutral again, and then reverse is sort of there. This cable can actually flip right up, but you're actually in reverse by here. So a good thing to look at when you're adjusting your cable is where is this hole. At the moment that falls reasonably nicely on. The gear selector at the front of the boat's in neutral and the gearbox is in neutral. It sort of naturally sits a little bit further out, but it's the tiniest amount. Now if this was out, if my gear selector was in neutral here and my gear selector at the forward controls was in neutral, and this linkage was either, you know, a centimetre that way or a centimetre that way, I would need to undo this locking nut and wind it. So I'll just go grab a 10mm spanner and we'll wind that off. Sorry, it actually turned out to be an 8mm spanner. So if you wind this locking nut back, all you need to do is twist this connector to move that connector forward or back. Obviously twisting it on brings it further this way. But what it means is if this motor wasn't going into reverse, so that's forward gear, then if I had this connected here, that control's in neutral, but it's actually, so that's probably neutral there, and it's a very small amount till it's forward. And then if I put the control in reverse, it probably wouldn't push this far enough to actually engage reverse, which is here. So I'll go put it in reverse and I'll show you. So that's now the control in reverse, and it would have got it to about there. That may be reverse, it may be on the cusp of reverse, you know, so it's actually got it so the dog clutch is knocking, but it's not ideal. So what you want is to wind these out so that whichever gear the gearbox is actually in, and whatever gear your forward control is in, these are roughly falling in the same place. Now one thing to be aware of is that you don't want to get to the point where this is wound out so far that it's only, you know, 1 or 2 turns on. I would rather have it slightly out, and I mean slightly, but on a good 3 or 4 threads, than have it really teetering in, because it's just going to pop off, and that can actually be quite dangerous. Nothing wrong with putting a bit of Loctite on this thread too, and holding it tight, although the locking nut here really is what does that job, as long as it is on at least sort of 3 or 4 threads. So I'm going to leave that on, because I know now, after having this in the shop and then testing it on the water, that this still isn't going into reverse. And I'm starting to suspect another problem, which is that the dog clutch has actually gone in this gearbox. So we'll be taking that out and have a look. But the next thing I'm going to show you is how that linkage is attached to the gearbox and how that distance is adjustable as well. So let's go have a look at that one. If we come down low, so just to orientate you, we've kind of come down lower on the outboard to the bracket here. You'll see there's a long nut here. This is a 10mm. And if we start winding this back, we're actually winding it onto the top linkage and off the bottom linkage. And eventually you'll see that the two linkages are, well, they're, you know, part of one mechanism, but they're two halves. So I'll just wind this out and I'll show you the two halves. Oh, before I do that, one tip here is that by putting the boat in reverse, I've pushed this linkage down low. If this boat was in neutral, this linkage was here. If it was in forward, the linkage would actually be up in here. So by putting the boat in reverse, and in this case I'm sitting on the port side of the boat, so on the starboard side of the boat, so winding it to port just makes it more accessible. So if you're having trouble seeing or getting to this nut, make sure you've got the boat in reverse. So now I've wound this nut all the way up. This lower half of the linkage, push it down, is free to move independently. So winding this nut doesn't increase the distance between these two halves of the linkage, but what it does do is lock them together. So if I was to push this down and then wind that nut down, it would lock them with that 5mm gap in between. If I let it rise up and turn that knot down, it'll lock them closer together. So that is a way of adjusting the effective length of that rod. In this case, the gearbox is in reverse and they're sitting hard up against each other, so that's fine. I can lock them close together. The trick really is having the gearbox in the gear you want and then making sure all the aspects of the linkages between the control and the gearbox are sort of relaxed in that position, you know, where they naturally fall. You extend them or retract them till they're naturally, I guess, agreeing with what the gearbox is in, and then lock them off. So in this case, I can simply wind that locking nut back down and know that that linkage is sort of agreeing with what the gearbox is in. I'll try and draw that later and make that a little bit clearer. But I have been all through this before, and I know that there's nothing wrong with these linkages, but this is definitely where I would start and where I did start with this outboard. So now all the linkages have been adjusted on this. They've actually been adjusted, if anything, to sort of favour reverse. So that linkage is, so pushing down is reverse. So I've actually extended the cable slightly so it's favouring pushing down rather than pulling up. Still doesn't go into reverse. So I'm really suspecting that the dog clutch is worn. It's supposed to have quite sort of 90-degree corners on it. Once they get rounded, instead of the dog clutch sort of catching on a gear, it starts slipping over. So when you hear that kind of clunking noise as you're putting a engine into gear, if that's what you're hearing, that's the sound of the dog clutch sort of hitting the gear and slipping off it. That can happen if it's if the cable's out of adjustment and it's only just going in, so it's skimming the edge. But that also causes the wear in the first place. So it's another reason when you're using an outboard gear control to be quite decisive. Like, put it neutral, wait for the revs to drop off, then put it quickly into gear. Otherwise you sort of sit on that cusp and you'll actually cause sort of premature of the gearbox. I'm not telling you how to drive a boat, but you know, that's definitely the main cause of this problem. Alright, so let's drain the oil out of this gearbox before we take it apart and have a look what the oil looks like, because that'll give us some more clues as to what's going on. So I got in trouble the other day from a comment about not being organised enough in videos, which makes them rambly and long and boring. So look at this. Here's what I prepared earlier. We're going to drain the oil. So I've got an oil pan. Here's some gloves. Here's some gloves so you don't get leukemia. Big screwdriver so you can undo the screws on it. Some diagonal cutters for taking the split pin out. a block of wood for blocking the prop, and then I think it's a 21, but I brought a 22 just in case. It's a little bit hard to tell till that split pin's out. Socket, then just either a, I'm just going to use an impact gun, but you could use just a normal ratchet as well, and then just a spanner and pliers to sort of make the composition of the tools look nice. So I'll just take this top, what it's actually labelled as the oil level plug, but it's actually also just where the air can come in as the oil drains out. And then I'll undo this bottom drain plug and get the oil out of the gearbox and also just see what condition it's in. So although it's dark, there's no real trouble with this oil. It's just used. It's it doesn't have any water in it. So I'll bring you over and show you. If there's water in it, it would have a kind of a milky sort of consistency. So there's nothing really wrong with that, which means the oil seals is fine. So while that's draining, I'm just going to take the prop off. So first step taking the prop off is just to straighten this split pin. And then I'll just see if I can push it through a little bit. So here this one's pretty stuck. You can see I'm just going to use this screwdriver to sort of lever it through a bit, which will give me enough of this end to grip with the side cutters and start pulling out. So I'll just put this camera out. All I'm trying to do once this end's straight is pull it through from this end using the side cutters. So it turned out this is a 22 mm socket. Then I'm just going to wedge a bit of wood here to stop the propeller turning while I wind this nut off. Then we can just pull the nut, the prop and the thrust washer off. So just a washer behind the nut. Probably just a bit of old grease on the splines, not sure. Can't see any fishing line or anything yet. And then behind here is the thrust washer. This goes this sort of inset side in towards the gearbox. So just have a look at that when it comes off and just make sure you've got it on the right way around when you put it back. So now that the oil's finished draining, I'm just going to pull out these two 10mm fasteners and then we can pull this bearing carrier out. If anyone's seen the video on how to replace these oil seals, you'll know that it can be quite difficult to pull this out. All you need to do is get a puller hooked onto here and then push off against the end of this drive shaft to pull it out, but easier said than done. Anyway, I won't go through the whole struggle again, because it is in that video and I'll put a link to it, but that is the next step. I've got this bearing carrier out now. If you watch the video on changing the prop shaft oil seals, I'll put a link to that, you'll sort of see the process for getting this out. It's quite sort of tedious, and these get really stuck. All this corrosion really wedges them in, so you need a good strong puller and a fair bit of heat to get these out. So this is where the propeller goes. So if you were looking at the back of the outboard towards the front of the boat, the prop would be on here, and then from this O-ring backwards is inside the gearbox. And what we have here is the dog clutch, and this is the reverse gear. And what you can see here is, hopefully you can see it reasonably clearly, is that these are the teeth on the dog clutch, and this is quite rounded coming back like this. If you look at this one, it's rounded coming back, and that's what makes it engage and then skip out of gear. So this gets worn if the boat's sort of half in gear. Hopefully I can show you that a bit closer. But it's these rounded corners we now need to get repaired. You can buy dog clutches and gears as spare parts, but I had them priced and they're about $300. So I've been given the number of a guy who machines these, so I'm going to go and get these edges machined flush again. It's actually my understanding that instead of going this way, he actually goes sort of 1 degree slightly backwards. So I'll get that done. If you get it machined, I've also been told that you need to take the dog clutch and the gear, the 2 mating surfaces, because they get machined to match each other. So I'm going to send these off, get them machined, bring it back, and we'll reassemble it. So this is back from being machined now, and this edge here of the dog clutch, where before it was sort of rounded, is now square. It's actually got that slight sort of backward angle cut in a little bit. It's got that on both sides, and that's the side when the engager pushes up here, when the gear linkage forces it on towards the gear, the reverse gear, it won't slip off there anymore, hopefully. So we'll put this back together, put some more oil in it, pop it back on the boat, and then we're done. So they're pretty straightforward to put together. It really just, the whole housing just slides back in there. What you can see in the back of the gearbox is the forward gear, and the forward gear presses against that front side of the dog clutch, and the reverse gear that's still attached to the shaft connects to the back side of the dog clutch. So we'll just slide that unit in and put its 2 screws. So to help this go in, I'm just going to lightly sand some of this corrosion off it. Not looking to take any metal away or anything, just get rid of some of these salts. So before I put it in, I'm just going to put a bit of rubber grease on the O-rings, just to help it slide in and to help it seal a little bit better. It's just important to make sure you've got these bolt holes lined up before you get it in too far. The screws for this housing have also got a lot of this sort of aluminium corrosion on it, so I'll just put those on the wire wheel, clean them up, and then we'll use the bolts to pull the gear housing in the rest of the way. So they're cleaned up now, and I'll just put a touch of this aluminium anti-seize on them, and then we'll pop them in. So it probably goes without saying, but just keep tightening each bolt a small amount, just to make sure you pull the bearing carrier in evenly, rather than doing one all the way up first. So now the thrust washer, and then just a bit of regular marine grease on the splines of the prop shaft, I should say. And then slide the prop itself on. Washer, castellated nut, and go and grab a new split pin. These, just use the shifter because I got it here. These nuts don't need to be torqued up particularly tightly. There is an exact torque setting for these. Well, I say exact. I don't think it needs to be that exact if you ask me, which I should look up, but I'm tired. It's the last Friday before Christmas, and I've still got 2 boats to do, so sorry about that. Alright, so split pin on. Now let's whack this gearbox back on the outboard and see how it goes. So the forward controls are in reverse. This gearbox in reverse by pushing the selector down. A little bit of grease on the main shaft spline as well. And then we're going to slide this up so that it engages with both the splines into the power head and the water pipe into the pump. So 2 final things to do is to reconnect this, bring this sort of collar nut down to join these 2 halves of the rod. and then hook this bar behind this lower rod, because this is the rod that locks the outboard bracket from tilting up when you go in reverse. So I'll do those two quickly and then we're done. And that's what it looks like when it's all done. This nut is wound down so it's on both threads, locking them together, and this is linked in under this nut. So I'm going to test this in the water as a final test, but that's in gear at the moment. I'm going to go and put it in neutral and just see if it spins. So spinning, and I'll try forward, and locked in gear again. So far so good, but I am going to now go and test it in the water because the pressure on the prop can actually make it skip. I've had this one before when it was in, where it was behaving like this out of the water, but was skipping in gear once it was in the water. So I'll go do a proper on-water test now, and fingers crossed it'll all be good. So we've had success, launched this boat, the reverse is working nicely now. I'd almost say that it's, I could back that, the way I've set this up to sort of favour reverse a little bit. I could actually back that off by bringing the two linkages at the gearbox, bringing them together a little bit with that lock nut, under the lock nut, bring them together a bit. Because at the moment when I go from forward to reverse, if you do it with any sort of vigour, you end up sort of going straight into reverse. So I think I can probably ease it up a little bit, but I'd rather be in a position where I can ease it up than be in a position where I can't adjust it. No matter how much I adjust it, you can't actually get into reverse. So the problem's solved. That machine dog clutch is definitely holding a lot better, well, perfectly. So I think that'll last many years to come now. So I hope this video helped you. Obviously there's a few different things that can cause an outboard to not go into gear or stay in gear properly. A lot of it's adjusting the linkages and controls. If you're lucky, that'll solve it. In this case, it wasn't. It was this worn dog clutch. Getting that machine seemed to be a good way to go. I did get prices. I don't know if I said earlier. I got prices, and it was about $300 to buy a set of dog clutch and gears. And that machine has charged me $32 to mill the dog clutch and the gear back to being good mating surfaces. So, you know, at a tenth the cost, obviously a couple of hours your own time to take the bearing carrier out and get it to an engineer, but definitely a cost-effective way to solve that problem. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a bit about how to diagnose and solve this problem if you are having it. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, please subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.